We'll call the meeting to order for the Wicomico County Council Legislative Session 2019-08 for April 16th, 2019. Those that'd like to stand and join us for the Lord's Prayer and Pledge of Allegiance, please do. Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory forever. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Entertain a motion from council to approve legislative minutes from April 2nd, 2019.
So moved.
Second. Discussions, corrections? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Minutes are approved. Entertain a motion to approve the work session minutes from March 19th, 2019 in reference to the Board of Education quarterly work session.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any corrections? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Minutes are approved. Entertain a motion to approve the work session minutes from March 19th, 2019 in reference to the strategic plan.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion or corrections? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Minutes are approved. Entertain a motion to approve the closed work session minutes from March 5th, 2019.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Minutes are approved. Entertain a motion from council to adjourn from legislative session to convene as the Urban Services Commission.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned. We're now serving as the Urban Services Commission. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes from March 5th, 2019 in reference to deed easements and a bill of sale with the city of Fruitland.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion or corrections? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Minutes are approved. Entertain a motion to adjourn from the Urban Services Commission and reconvene as the Wicomico County Council in legislative session.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We've now reconvened as Wicomico County in legislative session. First item on the agenda. Phew, I'm exhausted.
Already.
First item on the agenda, we're proud to present a proclamation in recognition of Wicomico Grows Kindness, and Mrs. Grace Murdoch will be here at the podium if you could, and you're allowed to take however many guests you'd like with you.
Thank you so much. That's so kind of you.
Councilman Bill McCain will be reading the proclamation for the council. And if you want pictures, you can get as close to that podium as you want. We don't worry about all that.
I think you had a birthday recently.
I did.
Yes,
Very proud to have
yes.
one as often as I can get them. It's all right.
Yeah, we're happy to have Grace with us, and we have a proclamation for Wicomico Grows Kindness, and I'll read the proclamation. Whereas the Wicomico County Council has determined that there is value in declaring ongoing support for collaboration of all levels of government and its citizens to create a kinder society. And whereas the Wicomico County Council pledges ongoing support to Wicomico Grows Kindness for its ambitious endeavors to encourage all of humanity, from schools to businesses and government, to seek kinder options in all matters. And whereas the Wicomico County Council hopes that its support of Wicomico Grows Kindness will contribute to inspiring all levels of government, business, and the community to connect through finding the courage to be kind. Therefore, be it resolved that the Wicomico County Council joins the community in proclaiming their support of Wicomico Grows Kindness and all its endeavors to promote and establish a kinder and more peaceful society. Done this day, April 16th, 19...
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Say a few words.
Thank you. First of all, it's beautiful. I must show everyone. Look at this beautiful proclamation. I love it. It's gorgeous. Thank you. Oh, I'm so grateful. And this has been a journey. I've been blessed with a journey, and I'm grateful that I was paying attention when I was tapped on the shoulder. I want to thank the County Council for this proclamation for Wicomico Grows Kindness and all it represents for the citizens and the communities of Wicomico County. This journey to bring kindness to the city of Salisbury and Wicomico County happened as a side benefit to helping people turn from despair to hope in times of need and even tragedy. Our communities in Wicomico County are committed to spreading kindness through hundreds of projects, from feeding the hungry to sending boxes to the troops and planting community gardens. Every run for a cause and every fundraiser for individuals show the true heart of us all. I am proud of us and for us. Your acknowledgement today is the culmination of 6.5 years of my work, and now with the launch of a community initiative invested in kindness, this work will continue. Stay tuned. We are already known worldwide for our kindness through Dance for Kindness. We are not finished. With more hands reaching out with kindness as we are soon named the first World Kindness USA city in the nation, just watch our hearts and our city and county flourish. Thank you for this honor today, and congratulations on your unanimous decision to support kindness. Thank you. Thank you.
I know there's a lot more to come.
There is. Stay tuned. It's a wonderful journey.
And we appreciate your presentation at the last meeting as well.
Thank you,
It's excellent.
gentlemen.
Thanks. Good morning, Mr. Taylor. How are you?
Good morning. One item today for public hearing. It's Legislative Bill 2019-01. It was introduced March 19 by the Council President. It's an act to amend Chapter 141 of the Wicomico County Code titled Fees, Section 141-2, titled Dogs, to include a breeder license and administrative fee, and to update the county code cross-reference sections for rabies vaccination, rabies tags, and dog licenses.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. At this time, we open the floor for public hearing on Legislative Bill number 2019-01. If you have any comments that you would like to make, please come to the podium, state your name, your county of residence, and your concerns. This concludes the public hearing on Legislative Bill number 2019-01. Mrs. Hurley, do we have a public hearing on this, or we already? I'm sorry. This is okay. I'm good. Entertain a motion from council to approve Legislative Bill number 2019-01.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, and we'll go by roll call. All those in favor, we'll start with Councilman McCain.
In favor?
Councilman Davis.
Aye.
Councilman Holloway.
Aye.
Councilman Hastings.
Aye.
Councilman Kilmer.
Aye.
Vice President Dodd.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Legislative Bill 2019-01 passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Good morning, Mrs. Hurley. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. President, council members, ladies and gentlemen. We have one change to the agenda today, and that is the work session on the discussion of hiring outside legal counsel will not be held. The attorneys are working on finalizing the resolution to hire special legal counsel, so that will just be postponed to a future council meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, the first item we have on the agenda is a presentation by the Maryland Association of Counties on the Kerwin Commission interim report, and we have Mr. Michael Sanderson, Executive Director, and Mr. Kevin Kinley, Associate Director, here with us today to go over the highlights of that report. If you want to have a seat.
Where do you
right
want to
there,
go?
Tim.
Michael, you can sit here, or you can go to the podium, wherever you'd like to be.
Morning.
Yeah, it really is a pleasure having you gentlemen here. I know you had to get up early to get across that Bay Bridge, huh?
No worries. Beautiful morning.
We appreciate you doing great work with makeup. If you could just announce for the public your position, your name, and your position.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. President, council members, I'm Michael Sanderson. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Association of Counties. We're a nonprofit organization centered in Annapolis. We represent the interests of county governments across the state on a long list of issues. Today we're going to talk about education, which in a typical county budget is bigger than everything else put together and the kind of thing that's worthy of some attention. Kevin Canale is our Associate Director, has been working on policy and media with us for a number of years, has been very invested, has been a regular attendee at the meetings of the Kerwin Commission, and we've been covering this very closely. So the two of us are going to try and cover education issues as they affect counties, gone through this legislative session, and how things look going forward.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. Kevin Canale, Associate Director at the Maryland Association of Counties, and I echo our Executive Director's comments.
Great, thank you. We'll let you lead off, gentlemen, if you'd like.
Okay. So I think we've distributed, you've got on your screen, and I think you've got a hard copy of a few pages of notes that we want to walk through. I don't think we want to do this in a ton of detail. Our goal is to try and hit some high notes, and if that triggers your questions or things that you'd like to talk about further, that's probably the best way to be respectful of your time and the rest of the audience. But this is a big topic. There's a lot of complexities, and there's a lot yet to come. What we've seen so far is just the beginning of some very large policy decisions that lie ahead. So Kevin's going to walk through the issues on the blueprint, and I will interject, I'm sure, here or there.
Thank you. So, as Michael mentioned, this is a major policy decision that's being made in Annapolis. This is a multi-year effort. This commission, many of you know it as the Kerwin Commission. It's actually the Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education. And as you see on the screen, this is now being referred to as the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. The commission has been meeting for over 2 years. They originally were supposed to come up with formulas that would decide how the state and counties would split costs for education. They were looking at things like wealth equalization, declining enrollment, etc. They haven't gotten to that part yet, and we'll talk about when they plan to get there. But essentially, what they've developed is this blueprint, and it basically is a bridge, I guess you could say, to Kerwin and gets this going, and it's mostly all state money for the next year. So the bill for 2020 it's $255 million in 19 and 20, and then $355 million in 2021, $500 million in 2022. For fiscal 20, this is all state money. There is one catch that counties can volunteer to increase teacher salaries by 3% or an equivalent of 3%, and then you would get a match from the state, but everything else here is state money. So a lot of carrots and just a little bit of stick. For this year at least. However, we do expect next year will be a lot different. And the funding this year is going to be paid for by casino revenue. They set aside $200 million last year as a result of the windfall from income tax reform at the federal level. And then we also have an adjustment to the online sales tax compliance. That was the Wayfair decision at the Supreme Court. Essentially, vendors who are selling products to Maryland residents but are located outside of the state, they'll now be required to collect taxes. That's a big part of how they plan on funding these elements. But as I mentioned, the core element affecting county budgets is immediately unchanged. So unless you were to provide that 3% increase to be eligible for a state grant for teacher raises, everything else coming down is state money. So the first category here is pre-kindergarten. There's $32 million here to convert more of the half-day pre-K slots into full-day for low-income 4-year-olds. That's estimated to grow by about $59 million in 2021 with further expansion. So we can expect that to grow. The idea is to get all 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in full-day pre-K. That's a little bit down the line. So again, that's the first steps here in targeting a pre-K program that covers all of the 3 and 4-year-olds who are at an income level below 300% of the poverty line, as well as 4-year-olds that are 300 to 600% of the poverty line, and that will be more of a sliding scale. So their parents would be expected to pay a little bit there.
Mr. Canale, what we have on the screen for the public is, may need to be advanced as you go along.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next category here is special education, $65 million to fund special ed in both 19 and 20 and 2021. Most of the special education funding was coming from the county level. The state decided they needed to pick up their fair share, so they sort of supercharged special education funding from the state level to help get caught up there. Again, school districts are not required to fund any specific strategies as long as they fully implement individualized education programs and 504 plans. $23 million here to fund in-school tutoring services for students K through 3, and that can be used for English or math tutoring. Mental health coordinators, that's been a big topic of discussion in Annapolis and with the Kerwin Commission. They have $2 million here to fund the mental health services coordinator in every school district. And teacher pay and training, I mentioned that a little bit earlier. There's $2.5 million in here to incentivize the creation of new teacher mentorship programs. There's been a lot of discussion about how to recruit and retain teachers coming out of college. There's been a lot of discussion about how to bring them up to par with other professions that have the same amount of education experience required, get them on that same pay scale. A little bit of money here to incentivize. And then, of course, I mentioned the 3% salary increase, and Michael can talk a little bit about that, how exactly you can get there and what that entails.
So this is all of these funding components in the bill that passed this year are down payments towards the larger items that the Kerwin Commission has in mind for basically the next decade of school funding. So what we're seeing is the beginning of this plan coming together. This year's bill was relatively easy to get through the General Assembly. The dollar amounts for the next 3 years total about $1 billion, but it's in increments that were, in today's dollars, they seem to most legislators relatively affordable. There's no real tax increase that goes along with this, so these passed by overwhelming majority. So that'll be an asterisk for a moment or two from now. On the teacher pay element, this is the piece that requires basically a county opt-in. What they wanted to do was make this a reachable carrot for most school jurisdictions. If your county funds a school budget that allows a 3% increase for teachers, you'll be eligible for some extra state funding that would also go back to teacher pay with, they can't require you to do it, but when you go back to the negotiation table for what to do with the extra pay, they'd like to have that money directed towards your new and first 5-year teachers, the idea of recruiting and retention of newer teachers. So that's the body language that's in the first year of the bill. This is meant as a 2-year program for FY20 budget you're doing now, and the 21-year budget you'll be doing about this time next year. That's what they have in mind as the beginnings. But this is inching toward one of the grand visions of the commission is to change the nature of the teaching profession. And I don't want to steal their thunder, but the commission has spent a great deal of time. One of their policy goals is that we should have more people thinking sooner about becoming teachers as a professional aspiration. And they'd like to put teaching on the parallel we always hear is with engineers. So as we get to the longer term version of the commission, that's a big part of what they have in mind and a big part of what would be embedded in the long-term legislation we're about to see. So the down payment is if the locals pay for a budget that funds a 3% increase, you'll get a little extra on top. It's sort of calculated as for a county that's neutral on the wealth scale, it would be about another 1.5% worth for your block of teachers. But that would be wealth adjusted, so a jurisdiction like Wicomico, probably a little more than that amount. I don't know if it would turn out to be 2/3 or thereabouts, but you've probably seen, I think in the fiscal note, we have the dollar amount, what it amounts to for Wicomico, but that's the nature of how that grant was set up.
And then next steps, this is another talking point that I think is very important that not too many folks are talking about yet. So in this bill, it directs the commission to develop recommendations for a more evenly smooth cost schedule. And that's important because originally, the commission's recommendations, technically it was a 10-year phase-in, but really it amounted to about a 4-year phase-in, and that would be all the way ramped up. And I think the General Assembly saw the writing on the wall that would be very, very difficult to do without raising taxes. So now they're going to instruct this commission to figure out how to phase this in evenly over 10 years as much as possible. And I think Michael has talked a lot about this too and the significance of it.
I mean, I'll just interject that I've been doing policy work in Annapolis for an awfully long time, and I think this is a very important decision they've made. In the big bill for next year, they were facing, I think, a political crisis of being able to pass a bill that required something like $3 billion of new funding by the 3rd or 4th year of that 10-year phase-in. If everything was really a 3 or 4-year phase-in, getting up to $3 billion more or $4 billion more in the space of 3 or 4 years even if that's half and half, state and county, that's still $1.5 billion or more state funds at a time when they've already got a looming structural deficit. And even if you make assumptions that the economy is going to be continuing along pretty smoothly in the future, they don't have the means to make that happen in any easy fashion. The idea of giving some nudge language to the commission to come back with a 10-year plan rather than a 4-year plan that's dressed up as a 10-year plan is, I think, a strong indication that Annapolis wants to pass this, and they want to have it come back in a format that they can absorb fiscally. I think what that practically means to Annapolis, and we'll talk in a second about what that might mean to counties, but what that means to Annapolis is the state's general fund budget is in the neighborhood of $20 billion. If ordinary economic growth means revenues come in by something like 3% more each year, you've got $600 million or so as new revenue each year. Now, some of that is spoken for if your population in Medicaid and other entitlement programs and so forth change. Some of that is mandated spending, but I think the core idea here is if there's $600 million in each year of new revenue, we could afford for 200 or 250 of that to basically be directed to the new education, and the new education funds are going to be to advance the mission of the Kerwin Commission. I think that's the constructive way to think of what they have in mind. What that means to the county is tricky, and we'll talk about that in a second, but we feel that the addition of that smooth this out so we can pass it is politically very important language in that bill. We now believe this bill is going to pass next year, and that's a strong sign of that.
Just more next steps. So I mentioned earlier that this commission was to develop formulas and how the state and counties would split the cost of implementing Kerwin. They weren't able to get to that over the past 2 years. Essentially, that was put on hold. Now that this bill has passed, this is all state money. The idea now is to get a smaller group of the Kerwin Commission to convene in the interim, and they'll talk about a lot of these formulaic components that we've been talking a lot about. Not only will they discuss how the state and the locals will split the cost, they'll also look at things like declining enrollment. They'll look at how we can evenly phase this in. They'll look at how you calculate wealth, whether you put a lot of it into property values or the ability for folks to pay income taxes, so your tax capacity there. That will be a major piece of this. In the interim, we'll be following it closely. We expect to have representation on that smaller work group, but that's really going to be extremely important for next year's bill, how they plan to parse this all out. And there is one other interesting component here in school construction. So this year we saw a supercharged school construction bill in the General Assembly. The House passed a bill, the Senate did not. It would have provided about $2.2 billion for school construction. The idea was to wipe the slate clean, get all the projects off of the table. That bill did not pass. However, we think that there'll be a bill just like it next year, and that will possibly cause some complications with the Kerwin bill in that it will be competing for the same money. So if you have $2.2 billion that you want to put into school construction, obviously that's less money on the table for Kerwin. And I think that was a lot of the debate in Annapolis, is that we don't want to spend this money to build schools, we got to do Kerwin. So there were some competing interests there, and I think that will continue into next session as well.
The governor's committed to he's committed to the capital expenses, right?
Absolutely.
For construction.
So, and I think the way we summarized it on our sheet for you, and that's on the screen for your viewers, is you can see this as a complementary idea, that you have a variety of education advocates who believe that we need newer schools or better or bigger schools, as well as a bigger investment in the classroom and the operating side. Or you could see this as a competing idea, that these are arguably alternative ways to make the commitments that, to some degree, the state is bound to make. The voters just in the last election approved a constitutional amendment that casino revenue should be on top of our current education formulas, not displacing general funds to just accomplish what we were doing anyhow. So the state's already committed to basically 125 this year, 250 the next year, 375, and then the whole shebang in the neighborhood of 550. So there's a school funding commitment happening anyway. You see that this year's blueprint bill spends money from casino revenues, so they've already sort of factored that in. The governor's original plan was to take the first 125 and say, we'll take 125 a year of casino revenues and bond against it to do this supercharged school construction plan. So in some people's minds, these are alternative ways to spend the same money.
Michael, do they, when you say casino revenues, does that also include lottery revenues? Because that is, and one person saying, yeah, no.
So actually, there were lottery and casino revenues go to two separate sources. The net proceeds from the lottery just go to the general fund. Casino revenues go through an education trust fund. So when we say the casinos, we're literally talking about
Casino,
Ocean
okay.
Downs,
Okay.
Maryland Live, the MGM facilities and so forth, the 5 facilities or 6 facilities in Maryland.
That is a good question. There was a proposal, I think, to use lottery funds for some of the school construction piece, so, but that was defeated as well. If you turn to your next page, page 3, and we'll get there on the screen too, we just have for you an estimated fiscal 20 state money coming into the counties for the blueprint. And if you go down and look at Wicomico, and on the next page, there's more of a detailed breakdown, and maybe we should just go there for exactly what this means for Wicomico County. And as you'll see, the difference between 19 and 20 is about a little over $14 million. It's a 9.6% increase in your state education funding. And we're happy to talk about any of the categories here, but you'll see how they break this down, and a lot of the components that we went through, you'll see here, and how that all balances out. And so for you, it's a 9.6% increase. This is, you'll hear a lot of people refer this as the small Kerwin bill. And I think Michael alluded to the fact that next year we expect there to be a much bigger bill with a lot more sticks and maybe less carrots for counties and maybe less state funding. Counties are going to be expected to chip in heavily and when next year's bill. But we wanted to give you an idea of exactly what this means for Wicomico, so that's in the packet, and I think we're happy to answer any questions.
Before we do that, let me just make 2 forward-looking observations. One is, very near term, the state legislature can't add money to the current year budget. So this year's funding and some of these columns of numbers sort of have an asterisk that they presume that the governor will follow up on authority the General Assembly has granted in this bill to basically take some money and release it for these purposes. There's no certainty that the governor will do so. This governor a few years ago was sort of boxed in similarly on some other spending priorities and decided not to do it, let the money just be unspent, and it fell to the bottom line. It's possible that Governor Hogan decides to do the same. I don't think we have a clear forecast what he will do. At one point during the session, the governor objected to the idea of spending more money without accountability provisions. This bill now has several pages of elements that were in one of the governor's bills, creating an inspector general's office to oversee education funding, some other provisions that are accountability related. So whether that will satisfy that concern of the governor, I think is unclear. We haven't seen anything direct. We'll know in the space of the next month or so. The governor, in theory, could veto this bill. I think that's unlikely. Whether the bill goes into law without his signature or with his signature is probably the confines of what happens here. But the governor still would have the option for the FY21 funding to not fund it, and this year would not be the bump that we're expecting. So that lies in the background here. I don't want to give you our forecast on what will happen there because I think that's uncertain. The second, I'll just say, looking ahead to the Kerwin Commission's, as Kevin mentioned, spending time looking at funding formulas and sort of parsing out how to do a 10-year phase-in and how much of this is state spending versus county spending. I wanted to give you a back of the napkin of what this might mean. If it plays out the way we're guessing it will, what does it mean to Wicomico County? Right. So here's your cocktail napkin math. Wicomico has about 1.5% of the student population statewide. Let's say that they've got a plan that costs in the neighborhood of $4 billion, and they're going to do a ramp up that's more or less smooth to get over 10 years. So it's about $400 million per year. And let's say, big question mark here, but let's say they decide that that pie is split 50-50 between the state and the counties. So they'll find 200, collectively the counties find 200. If you're 1.5% of 200 million bucks, that would suggest Wicomico's share is like 3 million a year. Now, I will say, I think the wise way to look at this is the state probably will again engage in wealth equalizing, and maybe on the ask as well. So Wicomico is lower than average on these wealth indices for a variety of reasons. So maybe the ask won't be 3 million, maybe it would be 2 million. But if you want a number in your head, what the passage of a long-term Kerwin plan might look like for the Wicomico County budget and your taxpayers, I think that might be the framework to be thinking, is in the 21 budget and onward, the state might be mandating or expecting that the county comes up with 2 million more in 21, and then 2 million more on top of that in 22, and then 2 million more on top of that in 23 for about a decade. That's more or less the dynamics of what we think the Kerwin plan translates to at the county level. I may easily be off by 50% in either direction, but to give you an order of magnitude of what collectively the legislation probably means to county finances, it's a big commitment. The commission has spent lots and lots of time about this being a generational investment in education to transform the way we do public education in Maryland. That's trying to take these big paragraphs and turn them into numbers that, as you talk about finding your $75,000 challenge here and $300,000 challenge there, 2 million a year, each year. That's probably the magnitude of what this is.
Yeah. What happens to the maintenance of effort formula? I've been told that they'll probably do away with the maintenance of effort formula and that it'll be a whole different plan.
I will give you plan A, B, and C off the top of my head. And plan C is I don't know. So the two easiest ways to do something like this, number one is a few years ago when the state was having trouble funding teacher pensions, they basically went to the counties and said, the counties, we're going to ask you to pay a share of teacher pension costs. And the way they did that was each county, your maintenance of effort number is now maintenance of effort plus this. They ran through a table of numbers, there's a big table, and for Wicomico County, it ended up being, okay, you gotta come up with an extra, whatever, $421,000, whatever the number was. So each jurisdiction was basically told, your job is now maintenance of effort plus X. In theory, the commission and the subsequent legislation could do that. They could start with today's maintenance of effort and say, you now need to do more, and we'll calculate it this way. So when I say, 2 million a year, they could just, your new nut for maintenance of effort is your old maintenance of effort calculation plus some number like 2 million each year. That's one way they could do it. And that basically assumes that current county spending is a legitimate place to start. Not everybody believes that's true. So it's possible that this commission or this smaller work group could say, let's start from scratch. Plan B would look like this. Let's look at what we as the experts, the commission, think is required to really provide a quality education for every student in every school. And we've got this whole successful school models we build on and so forth. So you could do that, and they run the numbers and say the state share of that is going to be, okay, in Wicomico County it's going to be 64% of that. So the remaining 36% is the county's responsibility, and we'll give you X years to get to that number. So that would basically say maintenance of effort is a thing of the past. There's now just a funding obligation. That is, to some jurisdictions, and I think as a matter of structure of government, a more aggressive way for the state to really take over the way schools are funded here. Plan C is something I haven't thought of yet, but we shouldn't confine our thinking to just the things that we've been able to guess are the obvious ways to do this. I think either of those are intellectually fairly obvious. Is it possible they come up with some hybrid or something totally different? Certainly possible.
Michael, just come back to your example when you were, and I know it's theoretical, so I realize that with trying to predict what we might be looking at in the future and how much the counties might have to share. But us being a lower wealth county, I mean, if these first couple years are any indication, I mean, it looks like we get quite a bit of the lion's share of dollars when it comes to, compared to what the wealthier counties will obviously get from this. So, you were using the example of, $2 million, which is about 1% of our total education budget. But, like in 19, it looks like, just as a result of this, we're getting like $7.7 more million. I know Bruce is out there in the audience. He probably knows these numbers better than me. But, and in 20, it could be $14 million. So, I mean, it seems like, proportionally, we do pretty well, or the lower wealth counties will do pretty well, hopefully, as a result of this.
I think that's a reasonable guess, but I don't want to
Right,
overestimate my
I know it's
confidence in the
speculating,
guess.
right.
I do think that the commission, I think Kevin would agree with me, I think they have lent considerable deference to the idea of wealth equalization.
Right.
And so on balance, a jurisdiction that is below average in local ability to pay, probably that ratio of what the state contribution looks like versus what the local contribution looks like, it'll probably be 5-2 or 7-2 or some ratio that's more than 1. And this conversation with us in Howard County would be a different conversation. So I think that probably stands to reason. That's likely to be what the commission recommends. And I also think that's likely to stay through the legislature. I think it's,
Right,
we'll see.
I was going to say that, the wealth equalization component has seemed to be maintained throughout this whole process, from beginning to where it is now. That's always been there and seems to continue to survive, and so I sort of expect that to survive throughout.
Without derailing the conversation, I will say, I was around in Annapolis and working for MACO during the Thornton Commission, which was the last iteration of a big, serious look at school funding, and that was in the late 90s and I think passed in the year 2000. The Thornton Commission itself was very, very committed to wealth equalization. The General Assembly proved less committed to it. And part of that is there's a different math in the legislature, and that is finding 71 delegates to vote for a bill.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to cobble together a coalition of just winners on a distributional issue. And so there is one particular large jurisdiction whose politics are blue, whose votes are needed to pass a big bill like this, who are much higher than average on the income spectrum. And if they come out as dramatic losers in whatever formulas come from the commission, it will be tough to get those votes from, say, Montgomery County. So it would be naive to think that the political process would ignore those sorts of things and just go with a commission recommendation because the academics liked it. So, if passed as prologue, we would see the General Assembly take an interest in those issues too.
Well, and we also shouldn't underestimate, how hard it is for some lower wealth counties like Wicomico County to come up with, even $2 million. I mean, we have X amount of dollars and we have a limited tax base and, highest income tax rate we can do, things like that. And, we'll get the budget here pretty soon. Last year we were looking all kinds of ways for stuff to cut. I like to cut budgets. We found about $1 million of stuff we could shift, and this is looking very hard. So, this is every dollar that has to be spent on the Kerwin Commission mandates is a dollar that's going to be taken away from other areas of the budget. So, I understand what you're saying, Councilman McCain, about, the carrots may be a lot more, we may get a lot more because of that, but $2 million, if we have to do that year and then, that new $2 million as the baseline, would come up with an extra $2 million the year after that. Good luck, Wayne. So you're trying to make all those numbers fit together in terms of revenue and spending on other stuff. So.
I think that lies in the background. In this debate, it's been a debate about education. And then if there's a 1A part of the debate, it's been about new revenues. And there are many people who are sensitive saying, I don't want to raise taxes. So if you end up saying education's the priority, we're going to do this plan, and then the body language from the General Assembly seems to be we want to do it without raising taxes or finding new revenues, we just want to sort of make this the first bird you feed in the nest. Okay. What we saw with Thornton over the decade of implementation of Thornton was the state said we're funding Thornton, and if that means road monies for counties and municipalities have to go, that's got to go. If it means that the teacher pensions gets too expensive and we offload some of those costs onto the counties, that's what they did. You don't have to have a fanciful imagination to see that things other than what's on the sheet of paper for the Kerwin plan could end up sort of eating the lunch of other things. Your ability to fund parks and roads and everything, public safety and everything else that's part of the county budget, and candidly, everything else that's part of the state budget. So that's the underrepresented part of this conversation, as it always is.
Michael, it seems like it's heavily relied on casino revenues. Has there been a study done by MACO about where those revenues are headed, say, in the next 5 years, comparing other states to what they're doing with their casinos, expansions and things like that?
I don't think anybody's got a particularly good forecast, neither MACO nor any of the economists, as to how secure casino revenues are relative to other things. Like, we know property taxes have a relative stability. Income taxes, a little more choppy, but there's a certain part of income tax that's relatively stable. Things like corporate income, wildly fluctuating. Casinos, in the short term, we know the traffic at casinos is a relative flow. They move up and down a few percent, but not a lot. But projecting 10 years out for casinos is a dart-throwing exercise. Are we going to get beaten by other states? If Virginia gets into this business, does that eclipse our own market? We just don't know the answer to those things. I don't think anybody's got a great forecast there. What the voters decided was that the state revenues, after the casino operators get their share and so forth, whatever comes back to the state all goes to education on top of the formulas that were in place at the time they voted last year. So we know that's got to be a new commitment. I think everybody's projection is that number is going to be north of $500 million. But I don't think anybody would put a hand on a holy book and say, we're sure that number's good 10 and 20 years from now. I'm not sure you can do that.
I think something that could drive that conversation too is sports betting, and keeping an eye on how they implement that in Maryland, if they do, and whether or not the casinos will play a major role in sports betting, or whether or not you'll be able to use apps from developers that are maybe outside of the state. I think the casinos are going to fight very hard to get the sports books within their casinos. Sports betting in general, I think, will probably, I don't want to make a prediction that's wrong, but it'll probably be on the ballot along with cannabis, right? So cannabis is another big component here. Legalizing cannabis, the revenue that they could generate there at the state level could certainly help to pay for the blueprint, but I don't think anyone's anticipating that that's going to be cannabis and sports betting. We can just wash our hands and we'll be good to go. But those are two issues that I think are worth paying attention to in regard to how this is implemented in the state.
Has there been any conversations as far as, I guess I don't know where the cannabis conversation went, but I had to attend a conference in the West Coast this past year. Went to the West Coast twice, and you've got a lot of small communities that are thriving due to the new revenues from cannabis and marijuana. Is that where is the state looking, ooh, that's a new piggy bank for us, or is it something where the counties, because assuming Maryland's probably going to move in that direction, I want to, if that does happen and it does come to Wicomico, then I'd like, it'd be better if we were a little more, if that were an area we could get money out of, not so much the county. I don't know where that conversation's at.
I think that will be an ongoing conversation. I think as far as our prediction, I think cannabis will be on the ballot in 2020. I think they'll kick it to the voters and let them decide. Most states are going in that direction. I think it's yet to be seen about how much counties will be able to generate, or if the state, how much of a role the state will play. I think that's all up for debate, and that's certainly something that I think MACO will be involved with in terms of your autonomy there and how you can raise revenue and where these businesses can be located, things like that. So I think that'll be ongoing.
I think that'll be a hard fight for us. It'll be one we'll take up. But in the event that if the wind is blowing in that direction and this is heading toward being adult use legalized in the state, it will be a fight for local governments to see that as a local revenue source instead of exclusively state.
I'd kind of say this in jest, Michael, but it appears that it's somewhat ironic that the more depraved we get as a society, the more funding we'll find for our education. I mean, you're talking about gambling, you're talking about marijuana. If everything goes forward, great, we'll have education.
Sin taxes are always difficult.
And everything's in relative, in degrees. Is there like a hard and fast deadline that we know we're going to see from this? Obviously, it has to go back through the legislation again, But again, our budget's pretty much cut this year. Not going to be an issue. Next year, about this exact same time is when we're going to be looking at our budget. Will we know, do you think, by that time that the state sort of figured this out yet? Or is it still going to be for the following year? Or is it going to be a surprise after we finish our budget next year?
It's an excellent question. I have one little light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay.
And that is, generally speaking, Annapolis is sympathetic when folks like Mako or your budget officers or our elected officials come to the table and say, if you want us to do something this year, we need to know.
Right.
We need to know,
Right.
by the 1st of April, and preferably sooner. So they've generally been receptive to that. If there's going to be an ask in next year's budget that's more than just what's in the bill that's already before us, I would anticipate that the messaging will get out, here's what's in the bill, you can expect this part to pass. We're going to fight about other stuff, but these pieces are probably going to happen. So, I think the worst case is we're talking, we're sending out something on Valentine's Day saying, here's our best guess with relatively high certainty. It hasn't passed, but we think this is what you should, build your first draft around.
Yeah, I've often wondered how much better our schools would have been if this took effect during the Ehrlich administration, like the past 16 years. So with that said, I watched a lot of the hearings on the website, and I would say Mako was well represented there. So thank you all for coming to give us an update.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Any other questions? Josh?
Are we going to be a part of the new podcast that you guys are doing? You could at least mention Wicomico.
We'll do it. We'll do it.
All right.
Absolutely.
I'm
Absolutely.
listening.
Thanks for the reference. And for anybody else who's listening or watching, Kevin is the host, and I'm occasionally a guest of the Conduit Street podcast. That's our street address in Annapolis, and we try and cover policy and politics in Annapolis, some county stuff, some other stuff we find interesting. So dial in if you like this sort of stuff.
Yeah, come on in. I'd love to have you.
You got it?
Yeah, I think if you really want to know how state politics are affecting us on the local level, that's a shortcut to figure that out.
Yeah.
It's an
That's
excellent
our goal.
resource.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, thank you,
And
guys.
thank you so much for coming down again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Don't be a stranger.
Next on the agenda, we have a presentation by Mr. Chris Jarboe with the Navy Air Station, Patuxent River, and he will be speaking on the environmental impact statement.
Good morning, how are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate spending some time with you. Do my introduction. My name is Chris Jarboe. I'm a representative of the Naval Air Station, Patuxent River. I work for the Atlantic Test Range, but myself, I'm a lifelong resident of Maryland, born and raised in St. Mary's County. And really today I'm coming to you to speak to you from both sides, from my Navy role and then also as your neighbor across the bay. I want to share an effort that we're getting ready to launch. We're in the first few months of it, which is updating or redoing our environmental impact statement. Little introduction. Our environmental impact statement, we did an original statement way back in 1998. So we're looking at, a document that's 20 years old. It's about time we're looking to go and redo it, kind of refresh the effort that we did. And the EIS, the purpose is really to support the testing that we do in the airspace that overlies the bay and stretches over here onto the eastern shore and very close to Salisbury and parts of Wicomico. The environmental analysis, the reason that we need to update it, again, over 20 years we've had a lot of changes in technology that we operate, in the environment and in the population that's come and gone in the area. And then the last reason we're doing this, we have to comply with the laws, federal laws, and our big driver is the National Environmental Policy Act, which I'll kind of talk about a little bit in a future slide. Here it is. So basically, it's amazing. The National Environmental Policy Act, it's a federal law passed in 1969, and it basically has federal agencies look at how our major actions affect the human environment and then also the natural environment. So we'll go through and we'll take a look at all of our testing and analyze it with respect to numerous factors. And the EIS, Environmental Impact Statement, is just basically taking that analysis and putting it into a document that the community can take a look at and that documents our decision-making process. I mentioned earlier testing. Patuxent River Complex, NAS Patuxent River, it's a major testing facility for all of the Department of Defense. 99% of Navy and Marine Corps aircraft come through the test range, but then we also support Air Force, even Army for their helicopters will sometimes come to the test range. And we're also open to other corporations like Boeing or some of the other large aerospace companies will come out also. And then we do primarily aircraft testing. I won't read all this stuff on the list, but one of the things that we do, which might be of interest, is that we do what's called weapons integration testing. Fancy word for we'll strap something that resembles a bomb or a missile on an aircraft just to make sure the aircraft can carry it, can release it, various tests like that, but we don't do anything explosive. It's non-explosive, what they call ordnance or shapes.
Does that change? Because you used to actually do explosives, didn't you?
Well, years ago.
Down off Bloodsworth Island, there's this area down there?
Yes,
Right.
yeah, the operational units out of Norfolk would come up and they would use Bloodsworth Island.
Right.
And they did do explosive firing up there with ship-to-shore gunnery. I believe that ended in the early 90s.
Okay.
And we have no plans, since we're just testing aircraft, we have no plans to do any of that type of activity
Okay.
as we go forward. This map that I'm showing on the screen, this is what we call our study area, and we have to kind of put a boundary around what we're looking at. For land areas, we're looking at the property that we own, which is Patuxent River in St. Mary's County, and then Webster Field, which is a smaller auxiliary airfield. And then also, as you highlighted, we now, as the Naval Air Station, we own Bloodsworth Island. We took it over from the fleet in the early 2000s. So we'll be looking at activities potentially taking place there. We look at our airspace. We have a block about 2,300 square miles of restricted airspace across the central portion of the bay and the eastern shore in northern neck of Virginia. We're also going to look at what we call adjacent shared airspace. We also fly in FAA airspace, which is, again, it's not restricted. We share it with commercial aviation and private aviation. So we're going to look at that. And then also some higher altitude FAA airspace that we can use from time to time to expand our range if we have an activity that won't fit within the smaller area. And then lastly, we'll be looking at our water ranges. So that is the central stem of the Chesapeake Bay. We're allowed to release these dummy bombs, so to speak, off of the aircraft into that area so they hit the water. And then we'll also be looking at some of the surrounding waters near the base in the Patuxent River and the St. Mary's and Potomac rivers. Our proposed action on NEPA, National Environmental Policy documents, have you do a proposed action, and it's pretty simple. We've been testing and training at Patuxent River for, well, since 1940s, and we plan to just continue doing that. Our alternatives, we don't have those developed yet, but what we'll do is look at a range of alternatives. You have a baseline called a no-action alternative, which is basically doing what we do today. And then we'll develop a series of other alternatives that are probably looking at a different tempo, like more flight hours or more operations, less operations. So that way we have something to compare. So for resources that we're going to study, we're going to look at the gamut of the environment. So we'll be looking at water quality with the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries and what effects our operations have on those. We'll also be looking at different species, endangered species. We'll look at historic resources. In the center of the photo, we have a picture. This is Point No Point Lighthouse, but across the bay, we'll be looking at other historic structures for Hoover Island Lighthouse. We also, a big component of these studies is noise, and that's probably one of maybe the major impacts in addition to some of the water issues that you would see on the eastern shore. And if I'm maybe repeating myself, but also looking at air quality and how we contribute or change that. Going on to the next slide. So the last slide, a major component of the National Environmental Policy Act process is public involvement, and we really do value input from the citizens within the areas where we're studying. We want to hear from everyone. We did have public scoping meetings, and our public comment period, at least on the beginning of the process, it ended April 1st. We had 4 meetings across the area, 2 here on the Eastern Shore, 1 in Princess Anne and 1 in Cambridge. Folks came and provided comments, and we also received comments in writing and via our website. And the comment period is closed, and we're taking those comments and we'll incorporate them into our study. But if we really would like folks to be knowledgeable and be involved. We have a website. It's very simple, PRC, Patuxent River Complex, EIS. So it's, World Wide Web, prceis.com. We have a lot of information on the study and our operations, and then we also have a phone number and address, so if people have questions, they can contact us. And we really do look forward to hearing from folks. Across the bottom of the slide is basically our process map of where we're going as we produce our document. Our next public comment period is going to be in 2020, and that's when we release the draft document. So it'll be a nice, well, I guess nothing's in paper anymore, but it'll be a nice thick document if we print it out. But folks can take a look at it. Traditionally, we've always held public meetings at that point, and we would evaluate the input we had from the scoping meetings, and I'm sure we would come back to the Eastern Shore and look for a suitable venue, kind of have the public in again, and then again we'll open up the online comment period too at that point. And so that's basically what I wanted to share with the council today. I don't know if there are any questions.
Any questions from Josh?
2 things. First of all, I heard that there was another J-Luce coming. I don't know if that's actually happening, if that's a different branch of the government for our area.
Another what?
Joint land use study for the military.
Yes. We're not leading it, but I understand the state, I think it's the Department of Economic Development, was looking at a statewide joint land use study. I know there were some interviews that were done. I'm not sure of the time frame. We as the base, Navy itself, we don't plan to initiate another. I think several years ago, St. Mary's County sponsored a Pax River specific JLUS, but the one that's currently ongoing is a state-led effort.
The second point is NavAir, I don't know if you guys or other folks are pushing for more land protection dollars or any of the REPI funds. I know there was a big issue with Readiness Environmental Protection Integration, is that what it is? I think is what it's called. But to be able to have those funds to be able to use for land protection in our area, or our region, and there was a big disconnect. Apparently the federal government was helping out, and then suddenly they weren't. So there's a lot of landowners that were across the lower shore that were kind of left out, left in the dark when they wanted to help use their land as buffer and continue to be in agriculture or other kind of things.
Well, we continue. That actually is managed out of my office in coordination with what's called the Naval District Washington, which is a regional command. But we are continuing to program the REPI funding. It's a very important program for us because it does preserve land under the airspace, and we've always said the most compatible land use is farms and fields and forests. So we'll continue to program, and we've been working with the Lower Shore Land Trust, Maryland Department of Natural Resources through their land conservation. We do sometimes run into some issues where we can't find a partner in an area that can cost share, but we'll continue to look into that. We continue to support that program with the counties.
Yeah, I live over on the western side of the county and represent the western side of the county, so we see a lot of these planes over. And so as some of the folks were looking through your presentation that I represent, they had some questions, and I guess I do too. So this is an update of the environmental, the EIS, you said. Are you talking about expanding any of the airspace or anything like that, or is this just an update of the current?
It's just an update of the current.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't plan to expand the airspace footprint.
So this isn't about you're not talking about increasing the frequency of flights or anything like that. It's going to be about the same as it, has been. It's not triggered because you're making a change or anything like that.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And so, you talked about new technology and things like that. Do you anticipate more noise? I mean, we're kind of used to some noise. I mean, is it, the new technology is going to be more noise, less noise? Is that the sort of stuff you're looking at?
We will look at that. I can't specifically address whether we think it will be more or less, but the aircraft, it will be driven by the aircraft mix. Currently, we really don't foresee any new aircraft within the next 10 years, and that's the window that we're trying to address with this. Currently, probably our major developmental platform is the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter, which is a pretty robust aircraft, and we're doing a lot of flying with that, but we don't really have a next fighter identified yet. The only new platform coming in is it's an unmanned air system that's going to be used for refueling in support of the fleet out on the carriers. But that's going to be a smaller and probably not very loud airframe. But we will look at that. We do one of the parts, and I apologize for going on, but one of the parts is that noise analysis is very integral to this effort.
What Councilman Kilmer is trying to say is that if you're going to continue to fly the aircraft, he'd rather you fly them over Councilman Holloway's district as opposed to his.
They have to fly over my district to get to his district, though. So.
Any other questions? No? Mr. Jarbo, we thank you very much for the presentation.
Well, thank you very much for your time.
And when the draft comes out, I'm certain we'll be notified.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
We'll get an electronic copy. It'd be great.
Yep. Okay.
Wonderful.
We'll do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is to receive the county executive's operating budget for fiscal year 2020. The proposed fiscal year 20 budget was hand-delivered to the council office late last Friday afternoon. The budget will be processed as a legislative bill, and that bill will be introduced at the next council meeting. Council will hold a public hearing on the budget on May the 7th at 6 p.m. in council chambers. Following the budget hearing, we'll start scheduling budget sessions with department heads. The budget is to be adopted by June the 1st, but the county council can extend that date by resolution to a date no later than June the 15th. If council is unable to adopt a budget by either of those dates, the budget as submitted by the county executive will automatically become adopted. We are in the process of assembling the budget, and once that is done, we will distribute that to council members.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, the next item for business on the agenda is Resolution Number 67, 2019, declaring that Elite Construction LLC is eligible to receive enterprise zone benefits for property at 107 Williamsport Circle, Salisbury, Maryland. In order for a business to qualify for enterprise zone benefits, it must meet one of two specific requirements, which are that the business must either make an investment in the capital improvements of more than $50,000, or they have to hire new employees since they've been located in the zone. Elite Construction LLC qualifies for the enterprise zone benefits because they've hired more than 2 employees at their location in the zone. And we do have Laura Soper here with the City of Salisbury. She's our enterprise zone coordinator.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. Entertain a motion from council to approve Resolution 67, 2019.
So moved.
Second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Resolution 67, 2019, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried, resolution passes. Thank you, Ms. Sober.
Good job, Laura.
That is all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Hurley. Mr. Taylor.
Yes. Today we have 2 bills for introduction only. The first is Legislative Bill 2019-02. It's an act to amend the county council, pardon me, the Wicomico County Code, Chapter 138, titled Electrical Standards, Section 18, titled Exploration and Renewal of Certifications, to clarify the types of continuing education hours that the Board of Electrical Examiners must accept when reviewing applications to renew certificates of registration. And that is for Mr. Weston Young to discuss, because I can't do it if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. I entertain a motion from council to introduce legislative bill 2019-02.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Discussion. I thought Bill Mister would be up here, doesn't he?
Good morning. Bill's here. Yeah, I should be able to handle it.
Okay.
Weston Young, Assistant Director of Administration. So this proposed bill modifies Chapter 138, electrical standards. This matches the state standards in regards to continuing education for license renewal. As it stands now, all applicants must demonstrate 10 continuing education hours each biannual period, and all 10 of these hours must be in a classroom setting. The proposed change with this bill is to allow half of these hours to be taken online, and that's exactly what the state allows. So 5 hours must be in the classroom. You can do all 10 in the classroom if you still want, but this allows at least 5 of those hours. Taking continuing education online is common practice. You can even get a master's degree or other advanced degrees online nowadays. And as a personal example of online training, I can do all of the continuing education credit I need for my professional engineering licenses online. I still go to a classroom periodically, but that's allowed completely online. So this brings us in line with the state. But one of the other biggest benefits for doing this is for convenience and flexibility. For example, a master electrician could choose to take an online class at night to avoid too much time off the job site during normal working hours. And these online classes tend to provide more subject options, so you can focus on your particular expertise rather than having to take a generalized class. And they tend to be cheaper because you don't need the classroom, so you don't need the rented space. And the internet brings more competition and scalability. So once they create a class, it can be taken by 100 people or 10,000 people. It doesn't really change the cost to create at that point. So we feel the proposed legislative bill would be of great benefit to the electrician community as a whole.
Anyway, Joe?
Well, one of the things, I got an email from a gentleman that's in the alarm business, and he said that a lot of this 10-hour classroom subject matter doesn't really apply to them, because they run the low voltage and things like that, so they're taking a lot of time out of their day.
Right. And that happens a lot because there's only so many
Right.
of the in-line, so
Yeah.
sometimes they're forced to take, classes that have no relevance to what they're doing. As Weston said, there's much more options.
Yeah, so it's a big
Online.
benefit to them.
Correct.
Yeah, that seems to be a way to make it a little bit easier to comply with the rules and regulations, so I commend you for suggesting that.
Sure.
And it's not like the student's going to click on the website with the online continuing ed and go watch the TV show, because every 5-10 minutes there's a break, and a lot of times they have to answer 2 or 3 questions.
They all do it a little differently. I'm not saying there are not classes, but they tend to be weeded out, the ones that you can just take and there's no quiz at the end. At least, again, my personal example is I usually have to take quizzes to show
Right.
along the way that I do understand the material I'm
That's right.
reading.
And this is not only a state standard, this is a national standard for many professions.
Correct, and right now we don't offer that, so, and it's only half the hours, and that's what the state allows, so we're not doing anything out of the normal here, and we're, I want to say,
I think
going
it's-
into the 21st century with
I think it's a move in the right
license
direction.
renewal.
Was there ever any discussion about creating a different set of standards or a different license just for the folks that do the alarm systems and the low voltage?
The low voltage,
It seems to me like that would make more sense, so.
I agree.
I think so. I think this was the first step in that process. I think if we look at it a bit harder, we'll find there may need to be additional changes made. But my understanding, this seemed to resolve a lot of the heartburn that the people obtaining these licenses.
Can the county set their own standard for that? Sorry.
After I first saw this, I thought are there other, I thought this was a great idea, and I don't know if there are other codes or other kind of situations like this from other aspects or other fields or other, I don't know if there's a way that we can maybe do a larger look at any of these other certifications across the board, not just maybe in other fields of nursing or whatever it might be. I don't know what all even applies to us,
Sure,
but.
sure. But so my understanding is the licenses you can get through the county is master electrician, electrician general, electrician limited, and more recently, electrical inspector. And yeah, we could maybe add a low voltage category, because the people that are doing low voltage typically are not a master electrician, but they still have to do, and maybe that's the limited category, maybe electrician limited. I do think the continuing ed courses should be relevant to the profession, because that's what's keeping them on top of their game in their chosen field. And it sounds like from what we've heard is that the classes being offered don't always apply. You know, somebody doing low voltage may have to take a course in marine pedestal electric hookups, and they're not certified to do that work, even though they've taken a course in it. So we think this is a positive step. We can, you know, it's a fairly simple one too, and we can see how it works and then come back. There may be other improvements necessary.
I think the industry would probably drive that if they wanted it.
Correct.
They would probably move a step forward.
Well, that was my question, is can the county set that standard for alarm companies?
I think so. I think we'd want to have a work group or some group to sit through. I'm not, like, I did research on this, but I don't fully know, like, I don't know the low voltage versus, you know, all the different aspects, like the reason why we have a master electrician versus an electrician limited, or.
At some point, it'd probably be a good idea to look into that.
I think so.
Right. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of introducing legislative bill 2019-02, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Legislative bill 2019-02 has been introduced. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much, Weston. We'll probably come to public hearings after the next one. Mr. Taylor?
Yeah, I should have said on that one, it was introduced by the council president at the request of the county executive.
Thank you.
Don't think that changes a thing. The second bill is Legislative Bill 2019-03, introduced by the council president. It is an act to amend Chapter 27 of the Wicomico County Personnel Manual, titled Definitions, Section 2701, to correct the definition of termination at will, to properly describe the status of employees on their initial probationary period and appointed employees as at-will employees.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Entertain a motion from council to introduce legislative bill 2019-03.
So moved.
Second? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of introducing legislative bill 2019-03, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Legislative bill 2019-03 has been introduced. Mrs. Hurley?
The next step on both of those bills is to schedule a public hearing, and we can have that on May 7th at 6 p.m.
Thank you, Mrs. Hurley.
Nothing else.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. This time we open the floor for public comments. If you have any comments that you'd like to make, come to the podium, please. State your name, your county of residence, and your concerns. And it's still morning, so good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Patrick Nelms, Wicomico County business owner and Somerset County resident. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. I've owned and managed Bayland Aviation at the Salisbury Wicomico County Airport since 1998. Bayland Aviation provides aviation fuel, passenger crew services, flight instruction, and charter flight transportation. In the industry, we are known as a fixed base operator, or FBO. As the only FBO at the airport, Bayland services are critical to the success of the airport, and we take seriously our responsibility for safe and quality services in serving as the outward-looking face to the airport's aeronautical users. Unfortunately, I am disappointed to say that in the last 2 years, the relationship with airport management has become contentious and troubled. But nothing at Bayland changed in that time. Over the past 18 months, the airport has sent me, excuse me, communications that attempted to suggest that Bayland was in default of its lease. In every case, I've provided the information the airport was looking for, responded with documentation, or complied with the requested action. A communication from the county's legal counsel that I received on Friday says 2 things that are important for me to address today. First, it suggests that Bayland's lease will not be renewed when it expires in 2025. Secondly, it demands removal of Bayland's fuel tanks by this July for reasons of Maryland environmental regulations. I want to address the fuel tanks first. The current fuel tanks are 30 years old, and I've been looking at plans to replace them. In fact, I've been bringing this issue up to the Airport Commission for several years and discussed it with airport management. If the impression has been given that Bayland is unresponsive or that the current tanks are dangerous, that is absolutely false. The tanks have continuous monitoring and annual inspections, even though the environmental regulations only require those inspections every 3 years. The airport's own environmental study in 2017 showed no hazardous release from the tanks. In 2018, the airport's environmental consultant stated that there was no evidence of leaking or violation of the regulations. The July deadline for removal of the tanks is arbitrary. I wish to proceed with replacing the tanks, but the recent communications with the county caused me to question whether, going forward, we will be cooperating or be in an adversarial stance. I would prefer the cooperation route. I hope the intent is not simply a campaign of harassment to make me want to abandon the airport and Bayland's long-standing business. Airport management would like to see us provide aircraft maintenance. Bayland offered maintenance at one time and eventually had to close due to high overhead costs compared to the number of actual customers. At no time in the past 34 years was aircraft maintenance required to be provided by Bayland or any FBO for that matter. Nowadays, business jets are primarily maintained by companies that build them. First, because they're under warranty, and secondly, because specialized tooling, manuals, and training are required. That leaves the customer market for Bayland for maintenance as primarily smaller piston engine aircraft. In total, we have 26 active aircraft at Salisbury right now. That is not enough to support a full-time maintenance base. We have been told that Bayland's lease will not be renewed or extended. I just would like to know why. On what basis has this been predetermined? We know that the airport and county are looking to promote and sustain the airport's long-term future. Bayland wants to be part of that future. We are the best positioned to provide FBO services because we know and understand the needs of the base customers, the airport's unique operational requirements, and we have good relations with business aircraft operators that may eventually decide to base here. I would like to return to present Bayland's comprehensive infrastructure plans and service plans to the county and airport management in the future. Bayland's proposal should be given fair and equal consideration. The FAA grant assurances require good faith negotiation for fair and reasonable terms. I have retained aviation counsel that will provide specific case law on those points. My family, my company, and I are dedicated to the airport's success. We are dedicated to safe aviation practices and great customer service, to supporting the airport and supporting the local aeronautical community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
And I
Nelms.
have copies, which I'll give to Ms. Harlett for the.
Thank you, Mr. Nelms. Any other public comments? Seeing none, that concludes public comments. Council comments. Josh?
Oh, yeah. I would very briefly say, first of all, it's good to see City Councilwoman Abel Jackson here in the audience. We did go, thank you for being here. She and I actually were on this past Friday, we went to Mac Center for a foster grandparents program through Shore Up. And this is a pretty good program, so it's nice to be able to speak to the folks there. This is for individuals who are over 55 who want to be able to help spend time with individuals with special needs and build friendships, and it's actually a good partnership. So that was good to to be a part of. Also, I went to the inauguration of Dr. White and with SU, and that was really great to see. And All Shore Chorus, I was for many years. I was when I was in high school, I sang for All Shore Chorus. It was good this past Friday to go and see a lot of folks there. And I went to a bunch of other things. I'm starting to sound like a politician. I will say, if you can, for any of the folks listening, third Friday, Salisbury is kicking back, going for the third Friday again. This will be outdoors. Should be a great event. And so I hope to see everybody out there this Friday. Thank you.
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, I think it was Thursday, some of the council members attended the Mission of Mercy tour at the Civic Center, and I have to say I was very impressed, and I'm thankful to see all the people that donate their time, especially the hardworking dentists, and I think it's done every 2 years, and it was a very impressive program. So, Saturday, Council President Cannon, Councilman Holloway, and I attended the Fruit and Little League Parade and open ceremonies. Some of the other Little Leagues had to cancel because of the weather, and it turned out to be a good event, a lot of people there, and we handed proclamations to the little players that were there that attended our meeting last, and we gave them individual proclamations, and they were so happy, and they wanted to frame them, told their parents not to throw them away. So when you see kids excited like that, it gives you a good feeling, and it means a lot to us to do that for the kids. Tonight is the Delmarva Poultry Industry banquet. I'll be attending that. I hope the rest of the council members will be attending that as well. And for the last 3 months, Laura Hurley, Miss Hurley, drove us up to Annapolis every Wednesday to attend the MACO legislative meetings with Mr. Kinley and Mr. What's his name?
Sanderson.
Mike Sanderson. So she took the time out of her busy schedule to go up there with us and give us a weekly update on that. And Council President Cannon attended as well. So it's very important that we go up there and network with the rest of the counties and the Maryland Association of Counties. It's a good thing, and like you've seen today with the Kerwin Commission, they do a lot of good work.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Councilman King?
Just a couple of quick comments. Several of us attended Dr. White's inauguration at Salisbury University. It's quite an honor, being only the 9th president of SU, considering the history. And also, I want to mention that the Salisbury had their Salisbury Marathon since we've had our last meeting, and I want to mention that our own Lynn Sandy ran the full marathon, and at 58, I decided to run my first half marathon. So, and we're both still here today, so we survived. And actually, a quick shout out to one of our county residents. I know we had a few actually, but ran in the Boston Marathon yesterday. A good friend of mine, Ed Godfrey, was one of those. So I want to give a shout out to Ed. He did very well yesterday, and so I just want to mention that as well.
Thank you, Councilman King. Any other council comments? Under presidential comments, I attended the Mission of Mercy as well. I had to do that because my sister, Sharon DeShiel, was the chairperson for the event. So, but it's really worth seeing to see how well it's run, how many dentists do come out for this and volunteer their time. They have to do plumbing into the entire Civic Center, to the floor of the Civic Center. Then they literally have to establish within a 24-hour period, they have to have the plumbing to pump the water out of these individual stations. So it's a huge process that they have to go through in order to make this happen. And of course, it's very much needed. You see the people there standing outside the doors at 5 a.m.
Do you know how many actually
I think it was over 1,000 that they.
Oh yeah, it was well over 1,000. Yeah.
So there certainly is a need, and they did do a great job. Also, went to Shorebird Stadium on opening night. I'll tell you, Steve, you got a good group of people out there. And if you haven't been to the Shorebird Stadium, you really need to go because they've put together the new walk-around out in the outfield. And that's really the place to see a game. I mean, you can literally go out there, and when a ball's hit into the outfield, it's about 20 feet from where you're standing. It's a lot of fun. It's a huge enhancement for the ballpark as a whole. And for the fact that they had the hindsight to recognize that this was needed, and then to get the funding and execute it, of course, it really, I think, has brought the level of the participation in the Shorebridge games up quite a bit as far as an enjoyable time for anybody that's going to go there. Outside of that, as Larry had said, attended the Hebron Parade and the Fruitland Parade and the Hebron Parade, and Fruitland had 2 parades, didn't they? So it was a good time. And same with Hebron. We appreciate all the effort that the people go through to put those on for the community. That being said, I would like to entertain a motion to adjourn from legislative session to go into open work sessions followed by closed work sessions pursuant to General Provision Article Section 3-305B1 to discuss a legal personnel matter to protect the identity of the individual, and an administrative closed session pursuant to Section 3-104 to discuss the internal auditor's project updates.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Meeting is adjourned. It's 11:25. First item on the agenda for the open work session is the discussion of the confirmation of department heads. Mr. Wilbur, how are you?
Good morning.
Paul Wilbur, County Attorney.
Appreciate you being here, Paul.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I guess what we're looking for here, Mr. Wilbur, is some type of path that the council, as county attorney, what your recommendations might be as far as the path that the council might need to take. From our understanding, the executive branch has stated that they will not be forwarding any of the existing names of the department heads to the council for approval as required by charter. Sort of like to get your opinion of this set of circumstances, the legality of it, and what the options or alternatives might be for the county as a whole.
Okay. I think just by way of background, which I think you're all familiar with, there were charter amendments that were passed by the public at the last election in November. The 2 charter amendments that are the point of discussion were relating to the appointment and confirmation of the Assistant Director of Administration and departmental deputy directors. The question that has come up, the legal question, is that Executive Culver has questioned the legal validity of the advertisement and the ballot question that presented those charter amendments to the public. And I think, as I've indicated both to you and to the executive, that I consider the advertisement and the ballot question to be legally sufficient. So that is the, say, the legal question that is facing the county at the present time.
Well, can we ask to clarify a question? So that didn't, so let's set that legal controversy aside if we can for 1 second.
Yep.
The charter, as it has existed since 2006, I guess it was when it went into effect, said, 6 months after an election, department heads must be submitted to, after the election of each county executive election, department heads must be submitted to the county council for approval. That's what the charter has always said. These ballot questions did not affect that in any way, did they? I mean, they didn't even touch on that, did they?
Right. That's correct. The ballot question related to the appointment and confirmation of the Assistant Director of Administration and the Deputy Department Heads.
Yeah, and those names have already been submitted. I mean, we're talking about, Weston is the assistant, administrator. He's already been submitted and confirmed. So, I mean, that, I'm not sure why there's a legal question about that, because that's already been complied with.
Right.
Yeah.
As far as that appointment, that's a moot question at this point.
Yeah, but I just wonder where the controversy comes up for department heads for that, the 6-month confirmation after each election. That wasn't even a question in the ballot question. So I'm at a loss here to understand what the controversy is about. I mean, is your legal opinion that the executive should submit those names in accordance with the charter 6 months after the election, which would be May, is, kind of the timeline?
Right. Yes, rather let me answer it maybe in a more roundabout way. I think Executive Culver's position is that the advertisement and the ballot question create a legal validity question for the entire charter section.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
That being said, in my opinion, regardless of any legal outcome, legal decision about the new charter amendment, the old language which relates to department heads is in place, and correspondingly, the name should be submitted.
Okay. Thank you.
Larry?
Yeah, Mr. Wilbur, you have many, many years of county experience as a county attorney or government municipality.
Too many.
So I don't need to know how many, but you have a lot of experience. So your opinion on what you said previously about the ballot question, I think it's validated. You think everything's in place. So what is the issue?
Well, of course, Executive Culver views it differently, so I think he could explain his position in an appropriate forum. I've stated my position.
Right, and you're still a county attorney, so I would appreciate your opinion on that, and I do appreciate it, and I think the executive should as well. And based on experience. That's just my point.
Yeah, Paul, what's the, if the department heads are not confirmed, okay, according to Mr. Culver, he's not gonna send them in to be confirmed. What's the legality on being able to pay them due to the fact that they're not confirmed?
Yeah,
How does
I thought you might ask that question, so we did a little research
Okay.
on that. I'm looking at a case that's a 1975 case. It's called Grooms versus LaVale Zoning Board. And there is a good discussion in that case of, you might say, different categories that public officials could fall in. And one category would be where there has been the appointment and the confirmation. We'll call that number one category. The second category is where there's been what I would call an appointment and a confirmation, but now we have a reappointment, reconfirmation scenario. So the question is, where does that leave the department heads if the names are not going to be submitted? Okay. And what this case calls a situation like that is an officer de facto. Let me just read a couple sentences. Is that the individual claiming the office be in possession of it, performing its duties, and claiming to be such officer under color of right, which color of right in this case would be they did receive an appointment and a confirmation, and they have been acting in that department since then. Since color of right may consist of holding over after the expiration of a term, and I think this case seems to go right to that point. If we are now, per the charter, at a point where a department head would be submitted for appointment and then confirmation of the council, what category is that department head in? And I think this language of holding over after the expiration of term is where we would be. One who is actually in possession of a public office by virtue of holding over after the expiration of a previous official term and who discharges the duties of such office is at least a de facto officer. And then one more sentence, it talks about public offices should be filled at all times without interruption. In accord with this principle, the Court of Appeals has recognized that an elected or appointed officer may remain in office at the expiration of his term and is entitled to exercise the powers of the office until his successor qualifies, whether or not the statute creating the office so provides. So, that's maybe sound like a lot of legality, but the bottom line, I would say, is existing department heads who were appointed and confirmed, albeit 4 years ago, are said to be holding over at this point and will continue until such time that there's a change.
So you're saying that you agree with the charter, Bob doesn't agree with the charter. Does he get that legal advice from someone else other than yourself, you think, or is it just his? Like Jim.
Could you repeat the question?
I say,
Yeah.
what I ask is, you two are in disagreement with the charter. Does he get that legal advice from someone else?
I think that question would be best directed to Executive Culver.
Well, what are our options when there's a blatant violation of the charter in this way? What are our options as a council?
Well, to answer that one, as I've indicated, I have a duty under the charter to represent both the executive and the council, so I cannot be involved if there's going to be a court action of some sort to determine the question we're talking about here, validity of the charter amendments and the charter language, that I cannot be involved, and then both the council and the executive should each have representation.
But as we discussed last week, the outside counsel can only be retained by resolution by the county council. Is that correct?
That is what the charter says. That's correct.
All right. But, I mean, I guess maybe a larger philosophical question is when there is, I mean, what if people just, charter says this, I don't care, I'm just going to do it anyway, which seems to be the case here in both instances. What's the remedy?
Let's just say when two parties have a dispute about what a charter or, in a more general sense, a contract says, that requires a judicial decision.
It's a sad situation. That's the case.
The case that you read us, is that a county government? And does it apply to our government?
This was out of the Circuit Court for Allegheny County.
Maryland?
Yes, Allegheny County, Maryland, right.
And I thought you said something about a zoning board,
Right, it was, it involved,
appointing a zoning board?
yeah.
Okay.
President Cannon, for clarification, you mentioned that the department heads that were confirmed the last election would be considered holding over. We
Yes,
do
that's what this case indicates to me.
We do have department heads that came on board after that election. So how would you categorize them?
I would say any department head that was appointed and confirmed, whether it was 4 years ago or 2 years ago, would now be in the holding over category.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat unfortunate that we're going down, this road, such a pretense that this is even an issue of anything substantial reference to the charter. I think it's very unfortunate because we're actually seeing that now, we're literally jeopardizing the security of the department heads in Wicomico County. We're jeopardizing the security of the county's ability to function as a whole. And it's this pretense of evaluating the charter one way or another. I think really this should come to some type of resolution where we don't have to go any further and take any more major steps. It's been suggested that we'll have to settle this through arbitration, or we'll have to settle this through the courts. I think the game should stop. It should stop soon. Would you consider it, Mr. Wilbur, a misappropriation of funds if the department heads are paid without confirmation, if they are funded after that time?
Based on the case that I'm referring to, I think that it's not a misappropriation of funds to continue to pay department heads. They continue to act in their capacities, and I think the county correspondingly is required to pay them.
Is that the only case you found that subject to this matter?
Actually, there's many cases that are cited in this case. It's not...
But since then, has there been any?
Well, I thought that...
More recent?
I thought
1975.
Right, 1975. I thought this case stated we'll say the categories that public officers can fall into the best.
Mr. Cannon, can I ask you just a couple clarification questions on what has just been discussed following Ms. Hurley's question? As I understand it, Paul, what you're saying is that this case you have would apply to employees or an official who has been nominated and confirmed.
Right.
That they would hold over and be entitled to be paid. If they have not been confirmed, then they wouldn't fall within the ambit of that case. In that case, then the payments would not be proper. Is that a fair reading of what you're reading?
Yes, I would say based on the cases, it's not just this one, but the cases that I've read, that if you have an appointment but no confirmation, then that would place in question this idea of holding over.
So that, in other words, if they haven't been confirmed, they're not really holding over in this particular context of this case.
Right.
And I do have a kind of a hypothetical question, too, and let me preface it by saying I agree with Mr. Wilbur on his reading of the charter amendment and the advertising for it. I'm totally 100% on that.
Thank you.
But my hypothetical goes to, I guess, the argument that's being made by the executive. And that is, let's assume hypothetically there was something improper in that advertisement and that referendum process. As I understand the law, what would happen is then the amendment would just be negated. It wouldn't have any effect whatsoever, and the charter would be just like it was before the referendum vote.
That is also my opinion.
Yeah. And I think there's fairly good authority on this in Maryland.
Yes.
So in so many words, then, I guess that what that means is that as far as the employees who were already covered by the appointment and confirmation process in the charter before the referendum vote, that remains the same. That hasn't been changed.
Correct.
Assuming hypothetically that the county executive has a legal argument, which I don't think he does.
So you're saying that even if there was proof to discount the amendment, the original charter would still be in place and the recommendations would have to come forward for confirmation?
Yeah, that's the net effect of an amendment not being valid.
Although if that was the legal position, which doesn't seem supported by any facts, but if that is the legal position, then why submit the name for the assistant director in compliance with this charter amendment if the thoughts were the charter amendment wasn't valid? Doesn't that undercut any sort of legal argument if you've complied with the law that you think is invalid?
I would say that would be a question for the executive.
I mean, I'm asking legally, isn't there, what sort of legal, if you you can raise an objection to a law, but if you comply with it in part and then don't comply with it, I mean, can you elucidate that sort of situation?
That's a difficult position to defend.
Okay.
Mr. Wilbur, does that same case, you think, apply to someone who's working in a different capacity as an employee that was confirmed as one department head, but in the meantime was changed to another department? They were confirmed as one department head.
Right.
Now they're in a capacity of being in another department, but they've not been confirmed.
That would place a public official in a different category for that second position.
So there wouldn't be a holdover.
So that wouldn't be a holdover?
If I understand your question, we have, in your example, a public official who was appointed and confirmed in one department and would be holding over, in my opinion, in that department. A public official who has been appointed but not confirmed, I think is your example in it, then that is not the holdover situation.
Okay, and if that public official's being paid, would you consider that improper?
The public official should be paid in the first instance of
Right.
appointment, confirmation, holdover. And the second, that's certainly more problematic. Yes.
So I guess the takeaway would be that, in your opinion, it is a charter violation for the executive not to submit the names of the department heads for confirmation to the county council.
In my opinion,
Yes, sir.
the appointment and confirmation process for department heads is in place in the charter and should be complied with.
Okay, all right.
And the challenge here is the charter doesn't address what happens in this situation. So the question comes to council is, where do we go from here?
That's a good point, Bill. I mean, is the charter violation a misdemeanor? I have no idea.
No.
Yeah, we have no idea where this goes.
No.
Well, I mean, I think the deadline is May is kind of when we all, that's 6 months after swearing in.
The 6 months from the election, I think it's the 6 months from the date of the election
Yeah.
is the critical date, which is probably May 5th, 6th.
Yeah, so I mean, there's still hope that it could happen. I mean, there's not been a violation quite yet,
Right.
2 weeks that, it's not a legally supportable argument. I mean, I don't think by anybody's means. And so, I mean, I don't know. It would be my hope that calmer thinking prevails and we go forward like the charter says and we move into budget season and everything goes smoothly and everything works great. I mean, that would be nice if that would happen, but, I guess we'll find out at the May meeting, so.
Just one other question, if I could, Mr. Cannon, save a phone call. Could you give me the citation to that case?
Sure. Grooms versus LaVale Zoning Board, 27 Maryland App 266.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I think it should be recognized that the charter isn't what you would call a code of honor. It is actually the law, and it should be
It's the
adhered to.
Constitution of the county.
Exactly, yeah.
Yep.
Any other
And
questions?
we all take an
Mike.
oath to uphold that Constitution. Right?
You do?
Yep.
Can't hear you, Joe.
I think Councilman McCain suggested, I don't know if he suggested it, but that's how I'm taking it, is that we need to work on the charter to help rectify this in the future.
But
But right now, this situation has to be remedied.
But if it's just going to be ignored, I mean, we could write whatever we want there. If it's just going to be ignored, I don't know. I mean, you have a situation where it's just blatantly ignored. I don't know putting something in there that you really have to follow this, so.
What are the
I mean,
violations?
I agree that work needs to be done, but if it's just going to be blatantly ignored, I'm not sure what to do in that situation.
Any other questions, comments? Mr. Wilbur, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the discussion of the repurposing of the Purdue Stadium. Just you, Steve?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. President. Bring your staff up here. They're here just in case. So. That's right. Thank you, Mr. President and members of the council. So I'm here this morning to talk about a request to repurpose funds from an existing project that took place at Purdue Stadium and to repurpose those funds to address some issues at the exterior of the Civic Center. In FY18, the county provided $700,000 to replace the flat roof at Purdue Stadium, and that was, the estimate for that project was derived from a study done by Stafford Consulting in 2015 that gave us that estimate. The good news is that project came significantly under budget to the tune of about $400,000 under budget, which was fantastic. We bid the project out. The project has been completed. We waited a fair amount of time, and the roof itself is performing to every expectation that we have. So we have a surplus of funds from that project, which was done. So what we're here to do is to request of the council the ability to repurpose those leftover funds and to use those funds to address some issues, as I said, with the exterior of the Civic Center building. As a point of reference, you know, the Jersey Boys incident that we had a few weeks ago obviously was, you know, very disappointing and a very frustrating night for a lot of folks, including our staff, and was.
I was there.
Yeah. Well,
I was outside.
Okay. Well, there were many, and we've heard from those folks, and again, that was a very disappointing and frustrating evening. But one of the things that it exposed, in addition to, you know, processes and things that we could address. One of the things that it did expose was, you know, a lack of capability for us to be able to communicate on the exterior of the building in efficient ways for situations like that. So what we're proposing, if we were able to repurpose these funds, we would try to focus the repurposing in three primary areas. One would be to establish an exterior public address system at the Civic Center that could reach the entire perimeter exterior of the building, including the parking lots, so that you'd have the ability to make public service or public safety announcements if there was a weather issue, any kind of public safety issue, that we'd have the ability to very quickly communicate to everyone standing around the building. We established a system very similar to that at the Parker Complex when we expanded that facility, and that has been fantastic. You have bad weather come through, you had any kind of crisis with a push of a button, you can do an all-call to the parking lot, throughout the facility, all the ball fields, and we'd like to have that ability to do that at the Civic Center. So that would be one area where we would utilize those funds. The second area would be to look at replacing the marquee at the Civic Center. That marquee is extremely old and outdated. It's very difficult to update, doesn't often update in real time, and is very limiting as far as our ability to communicate with people, not just to promote events and upcoming events, but also to communicate to folks if you had a delay or you had some type of situation where you wanted to communicate with some type of video message or real-time kind of messaging. We don't have that ability right now, and so part of that we could look to replace that marquee to help promote and advertise, but also to communicate with folks standing outside. Can that marquee be used somewhere else, repurposed?
I don't believe so, because a lot of the technology is just outdated. So I don't know that it's of much use if we could replace that. So that would be a second thing. A third thing that we'd like to do, and this has been something long-standing, that we'd like to address some additional security measures outside of the Civic Center, things like planters or bollards that would make it more difficult for vehicular traffic to be able to address the front of the building or even the lobby where folks are. So we don't have that. It's far too easy for people to access right now. We feel like that's a security issue and something that we'd like to see addressed. And we know, unfortunately, in the world today that those types of situations happen, and we'd like to be on the front end of that, so.
So, speaking of that, I've been to a lot of events there, and I've seen, like, radio stations will park their vans right out front. Is that gonna prevent them from doing that?
You could probably make backdoor access, but as far as a clear shot for
Well, I
some vehicle.
understand that.
Right.
But I also see a lot of six-wheel trucks backed up to the front doors as well for
Yeah.
loading and unloading their equipment.
Right, and we would need to reconfigure truck marshaling and how to get folks in and out that belong there, that we want there, but what we don't want is vehicles to just have access to the front of the building. So ultimately, the request, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have, but ultimately, the request is to utilize those funds that were saved from the Purdue Stadium roof project and to use those to address some of these exterior issues.
Steve, just a real quick question. In your letter, it had also mentioned, the possibility of some of those funds being used to modernize the exterior of the building. I don't know, if you consider these items the modernization, or are you talking more about some facade changes that would improve the visual, the curb appeal? Because that's one thing, we've done such great work inside. You get inside, it's like, wow, look, all this good stuff, but the outside is still, our facade still our basic facade that it's been for a long time.
Right, and I think that needs to be addressed, but I think that is for
Another day.
Another day and another discussion, but I think.
I just saw it in the comments, so that's why I mentioned it.
Yeah, and I think if we were to do a video board to replace that marquee, that would certainly modernize our capabilities to promote, but also could serve in multiple functions.
I was curious as to how the original funding request that came in could have been so astronomically overestimated. It's like 240% overestimated as far as what the initial costs were.
Yeah, we had, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, we had received a report from Stafford Consulting in 2015. They did an assessment both of the Civic Center roof and the Purdue Stadium flat roof. At the time, their estimate to replace that roof at Purdue Stadium was $630,000. So being that it was a few years old, we had asked for $700,000. Obviously, they way overshot that, but that was where our estimate came from, was that study. And, we were pleased, obviously, that we could get it done for a lot less, but that's where that came from.
Right. And I'm kind of confused, and I don't know whether, Weston, you can help us with this or not, but, when you initiate PAYGO funding, I always thought of PAYGO as like a one-shot deal. Others, we said, okay, here's what we know we have, here's what funds we have available. And for the 2018, of course, we said, we'll commit 700. And I would think that, I find it surprising that, okay, so if you didn't spend the whole 700, and it was 2 years ago, right, we're really looking at, if you didn't spend it, and nothing was requested to what we're talking about today in last year's budget, as I recall, and you're completely sending it over to another department, it's almost the same as agreeing to fund solid waste, $1 million, and then a year later agreeing to take that same $1 million and put it over at the airport. I just don't understand how you can say, okay, we're shifting these funds that were here and that were
Sure, so.
isolated here to another department. Why don't you just turn in a new CIP based on the needs of the Civic Center itself, as opposed to associate it with something from the Shorebird Stadium?
Sure, so I think what Steve is trying to do is, like, when we come forward with CIP amendments for FY19 projects, and we could wait, theoretically, put it in the FY20 CIP, which I'll discuss later in the meeting, and just place it like that. I think Steve's trying to handle this now, in the here and now. So with PAYGO money, and I can go into more detail when we discuss the CIP. Typically, PAYGO for capital projects comes from revenue obtained in the fiscal year. So for FY20 CIP, the projects we've listed as PAYGO will come from FY20 revenue. The way PAYGO works, and it's somewhat similar with bonds, when we bond projects, that money is intended and the bonds are written for that specific project. But after a period of time, whatever's left over, whether it's unused money for a specific project or what we call bond premium, if we don't touch the contingency we sometimes have in bonds, we can sometimes roll that over into another project, and we do it through the budget process or come before council to get approval. PAYGO, my understanding from talking with finance, is that PAYGO for a project typically rolls over year to year if it hasn't been spent for 3 years. After 3 years, it's typically abandoned and then either goes back to the general fund or can be reallocated. It goes into what is called Fund 32, and I may need to rely on the internal auditor to assist with that, but Fund 32 handles these PAYGO monies that roll over year to year. In the CIP, what we're going to propose is that some of the PAYGO projects, so projects we're not bonding, we have them paid for out of what we'll say FY20 revenues as PAYGO, and then old PAYGO monies that were for a project, which gets to sort of what you're saying, and we're asking to reallocate that. That means we don't need as much FY20 money to pay for these projects. We're using old money that's rolled over year to year, and we've determined, okay, it's not needed. In the case of what's happened at Purdue Stadium, the work's been done. We have this leftover money, and we have needs. So, in essence, what we're trying to do now, solid waste in the airport, may not be the best example, but yeah, what although it was under Purdue Stadium, it could be something that, say, Public Works Roads needs, and we want to transfer from that department to the other. Steve in his house, which is, Recreation, Parks, and Tourism, is a very large entity. He's recognized, okay, the Civic Center has needs that we could use this money for, immediate needs, as the Jersey Boys situation detailed. So that's it gets into moving money around and what happens to bonded projects that have leftovers or in some extreme cases get abandoned.
Yeah, I've never asked before, when we approve a PAYGO, where does that money go? I mean,
I believe it's called Fund 32, and it's allocated for that project. And then after 3 years, if it hasn't been completed for whatever reason, and sometimes that's we don't have enough funds to complete it because our estimates come in not under like Steve lucked out with, but sometimes over. And we're encountering struggles with that with the tariffs and metal prices. Anything that requires lots of metal tends to cost a bit more nowadays. But yeah, it goes into a separate account that's specifically for these capital projects.
Okay. Mr. Cannon, it's in section 710 of the charter. It's a short sentence. Do you want me to read it about the PAYGO? It just says that the balance remaining to the credit of the completed or abandoned capital projects shall be available for appropriation in subsequent capital budgets or be transferred to a fund for the retirement of bonds or payment of interest if funds for such capital project were obtained from the sale of bonds. So that covers it. There's several options, obviously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So in Steve's case, it's doing it now. When I present the CIP, I'll touch on some projects that are going to be, or that are being proposed to be funded with some old PAYGO money.
Right. Joe?
John, in reference to your statement a few minutes ago when you said how come it was so overbid, back in about 2008, the Civic Center director brought forward to put a new roof on the Civic Center, and I was contacted by one of the local roofing companies that they didn't think this needed to be done, and they hired an engineering firm to come in. The director had already hired an engineering firm to come in and said the roof needed replacing. And it was on the news. I heard about this roofer contacted me and said that roof doesn't need to be replaced. I convinced Rick to have the roofer look at it. They had the engineering firm come back and said, your roofer's right. It really doesn't need to be replaced. At that time, it was, they were wanting hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace this roof. So now we see this engineering firm, I don't know if it's the same one, give this estimate, and we have to move forward with a CIP and ask for this amount of money, and it kind of looks like, how much trust do we have in what we're being asked to put in the CIP when you're talking about, more than half, So, and I know that's a tough call, but I think we need to have a better idea of what's being asked of the taxpayers to spend, so you end up with this kind of money left over. I mean, it's great to have it left over, but, we had to borrow it to begin with. So it's been sitting there. We wouldn't have had to borrow but half that much if, we'd had correct numbers. And the whole CIP ought to be looked at. And I know it's tough calling it out a couple years in advance, but, that's kind of embarrassing to see you had that much, that was like that far off, I guess is the way to, not that much left over.
Sure.
It's nice to have it left over, but to have it that far off, I think is kind of an embarrassment to the process.
That's a good point. I believe all department heads should have justification for the estimates they're providing. We don't have roofing experts in-house, so in the case of the Civic Center, they're relying on, and I can tell you engineers, sometimes what looks good on paper, really you need to talk to the person that installs it, the field person, to tell you if it actually works or is actually needed. I can tell you, say like with the ferry rehab, if Whitehaven or Upper Ferry, we do that on a basis so we know what the prices have been. When you talk roofs, you're talking, and in a unique building like the Civic Center or Purdue Stadium, it's not always one size fits all, and they should last for at least 20 years, or at least they have warranties for 20 years. So when you do something that infrequently, it's hard to have updated, I guess, modern costs, like accurate cost for something you don't do regularly, and we rely on experts to tell us, and Stafford, whoever, they apparently overestimated.
Well, I think in the future, when you get a bid similar to that, you need to have a contractor or get bids from the people who are going to do it before you come into capital budget.
Now, this is
We
also
sit
one.
around here and struggle looking for money to fix other things, and, you're looking at, this much money just sitting there.
But this is also one project out of, over the time period, probably 50 plus that we haven't had those issues with.
Right, yeah, I don't want to overcomplicate this scenario, I mean, Steve did his due diligence, I mean, they got an engineering firm who was an expert, obviously the bid came in high, and we got it done cheaper, great, and, we want to repurpose those dollars, but the due diligence was done. If there's any recommendation, maybe, we just make sure we get 2 bids in the future, so at least we have something to compare it to, but other than that, it's just, hey.
Well, they didn't give a bid, they just give an estimate.
Well,
They
but I
don't
mean,
bid
2
for it,
estimates, I
right.
mean, just get 2 estimates, but other than that, I mean, it's, I don't want to turn this into something more than what it is.
As far as, your request here is a repurposing, right?
Right.
Either way, it's got to go through a legislative process. Is it going to be so much more expeditious to do it as a repurposing through legislation, or do we just reissue it through the other channels such as the CIP, and we recognize it as a project for, the Civic Center? I mean, I don't understand, at this stage of the game, where we are in the budget, it's very advantageous because we're here.
Mm-hmm.
So is it a repurpose, or is it something where it should be a reworking the CIP, which already has about 300 holes in it?
Do you want to touch on time frame? I mean, if the improvements are not immediate, we could add it to the CIP.
I'll tell you, I think Steve knows what he's doing. I think he has saved us money. If he's recommending, improvements to the Civic Center, great. I'm all for that. It's just a process.
Sure.
However you guys want to do it. It's going to have to go through the legislative process anyway. I just ask you to rethink it before it comes back to the table, because it has to.
If it can wait, it would make sense to put it with the CIP, so it's one advertisement.
We don't want to slow it up
one
either. I mean, the worst thing about
one
government is they're
public
always too darn slow with everything. So we'd still like to move it forward, but just
Spend that money.
the process that's a little bit more palatable.
Yeah, we're happy to do either way. I think at the end of the day, we just want the projects to get done. I think it would benefit the Civic Center, so.
Sure.
Whatever process.
Any other questions?
Last note I'll
Josh?
say on the Jersey Boys piece, it's great to be able to have audio go out so that people could hear what's happening. It would be nice also to have the visual to be able to know that there's a delay, but can't underestimate, obviously, the human. I got a lot of people that reached out to me saying there wasn't anyone there to tell them, and they were waiting for a while, but, as much as possible, the human element of having somebody speak to is also really important. Just throw that into, as you already know.
Yeah, I think with any situation like that, an all of the above approach is the way to go. And I think with respect to, I don't want to relive that whole thing, but with respect to that, with respect to the show, I think we did everything humanly possible to make that show go. We jumped through every hoop it in our estimation, should have happened. With respect to the communication with the outside, we fell way short on that, and there's no other way to look at it. We should have communicated better with folks. Even without a PA system, we could have sent people out. There's things we could have done in retrospect, but in real time, we believed we were ready to open the doors at any moment, and that's how we were preparing, and obviously that didn't happen, and that was very frustrating for many folks. And Mr. Cannon, I didn't know you were out there as well, but
we had a good time. We were just outside waiting.
I'm glad somebody did. But no, that was a tough night. There's no doubt about it. But
I don't recall that happening any other times, Mark, has it?
I've been told a Barry Manilow concert years ago got canceled, but no, this is a very
probably a good thing.
Yeah, that's debatable, but a very rare situation, and we hope to never have that again, obviously. So,
Thank you, John.
thank you.
Thank you.
We have two things. We have the PAC-14 has to change their tape. I do want to get through the, before we break for lunch, it's going to have to be 12:30, because I do want to get through the honorary street sign policy, because we have some people here that are specifically here to attend that work session. That would be it. Oh, I know why. I know why. Interviews, yeah. Okay, we've reconvened after recess. We're the April 16th Wicomico County Council meeting. Next item on the work session agenda is the honorary street sign policy and application, which I'd say I'm mighty glad to see we finally got this thing on the table here. April Jackson, I know you were pushing for this very hard. Thank you to Mrs. Hurley for actually taking the initiative and taking this thing and putting it together based on what we've been able to find in other counties, I assume?
That is correct.
In the city of Salisbury, I think?
And municipalities.
And municipalities. So we have put together a template, and the council's going to move forward with this as far as establishing some guidelines. What everyone has on the table here is a basic application process, because the county does not have an application process. If somebody wants to create a street sign in honor of a community, a resident in the community,